Imagine standing on the edge of a fjord just as the sun dips below the horizon. The air is biting cold, sharper than any blade, swirling with the scent of salt and pine. Your breath curls in the frosty air, freezing mid-exhale like little clouds of ghostly smoke. Out there in the shadowed woods and rocky shores, fierce warriors, Vikings, prepare for battle or long voyages, clutching weapons so brutal, so effective, that the very church feared their power. Now picture this. Weapons so deadly, so terrifying, they were banned not just by kings, but by the church itself. No medieval weapon was more banned, more whispered about in fear or awe than these 10 savage tools. But why? How did they earn such a notorious reputation? If you think Vikings were just axe-wielding pirates swinging at random, think again. They were engineers of warfare, masters of lethality, and sometimes inventors of downright cruel weaponry that blurred the line between fear and fanaticism. So stick around, because today, we're diving into 10 Viking weapons so deadly they were outlawed by the church. And you're about to hear stories that are terrifying, fascinating, and sometimes downright hilarious. Now, before we set sail into this arsenal of ancient destruction, let me paint a picture for you. Imagine the raw brutality of the Viking Age. It's the 9th century, and Europe is a patchwork of fledgling kingdoms and religious institutions trying to enforce their rule. The Vikings arrive not just as warriors, but as a force of nature, unpredictable, relentless, and yes, terrifying as hell. The church, which wielded spiritual power like a sword itself, saw these weapons and said, "Nope, these are too dangerous, forbidden for any Christian soul to wield." This isn't some exaggerated story. These bans were serious, backed by edicts and excommunications. The very idea that a weapon could threaten not just lives on the battlefield, but moral order at home was unheard of. So what were these weapons? How did they work? And how deadly were they really? Let's kick things off with a bang. Here's the kicker. The strangest of these weapons wasn't even a sword, spear, or axe. It was something many wouldn't expect, a seemingly simple chain. But this might be the strangest Viking survival trick disguised as a weapon. Imagine a chain, say about 5 to 6 feet long, made of iron links each as thick as your thumb. On one end, a heavy spiked ball, and on the other, a solid iron handle. This was the Viking chain flail, the medieval equivalent of a wrecking ball on a leash. Unlike a sword or axe with a rigid strike, the chain flail was a weapon of sheer, chaotic momentum, swinging unpredictably, smashing shields and helmets with brutal efficiency. What made it so deadly is that its flexible chain could wrap around an opponent's weapon or limb, disarming and crippling them in seconds. Picture this. You're in a tight battle, swords clash. Then suddenly, a flail snakes around your arm, the spiked ball bites into flesh or wood, and you're left defenseless or worse, crippled by a shattering blow. It was like holding a medieval wrecking ball in your hand, turning the laws of physics into a tool of destruction. The church hated it because the flail broke the so-called rules of honorable combat. It was unpredictable, messy, cruel. It couldn't be parried like a sword, making it dangerously effective in breaking enemy lines. Think of it as the Viking version of a brutal surprise attack, something like a guerrilla knockout punch in the middle of a noble duel. And for context, imagine swinging something around that weighs close to 10 pounds, accelerating at speeds that can generate impact forces over 600 pounds of pressure. That's enough to shatter bone and splinter wood armor in a heartbeat. But it didn't stop there. The Vikings didn't just invent terror with chains. They created weapons that blurred the line between weapon and tool in the most diabolical ways possible. Next up is a weapon that sounds more like a medieval torture device than something fit for the battlefield: the bearded axe. Now, at first glance, an axe might seem straightforward. Just chop, cleave, repeat. But Vikings crafted the bearded axe with a long, extended blade that curved below the handle, creating a massive hook-like shape. This tiny but deadly tweak gave the Vikings a tactical edge that turned a simple chopping tool into a multi-purpose weapon that could slash, hook, and trap enemies' limbs or weapons with terrifying precision. Why was this such a big deal? Because the shape allowed warriors to pull an opponent's shield or weapon aside in the heat of battle. Imagine a grappling hook on an axe head, and then follow up with a quick deadly strike. The beard meant a larger cutting surface, but also a hook that could catch on chainmail or shield edges, stunning the enemy and creating openings. It was agile enough for quick strikes, yet heavy enough to break bones or cleave armor. Think of it like the Swiss Army knife of Viking weapons, combining the utility of close combat with battlefield strategy, like turning your axe into a tactical grappling device instead of just a brute tool. The church banned this too, seeing it as an unfair advantage, too deceptive for the chivalrous wars they idealized. Their rules favored face-to-face, sword-to-sword combat, not trickery with hooked blades aiming to disarm or immobilize foes. In today's terms, this would be like outlawing weapons with hidden blades or mechanical advantages because they ruined the concept of honorable fighting, a Viking version of the modern rules banning certain martial arts weapons in sports. Following that tangled mess of chains and hooked axes, let's talk about a weapon that was literally designed to spread terror far and wide. Imagine standing in a village at night and suddenly hearing the terrifying screams of what sounds like a demon, a horrifying metallic howl piercing through the cold air. The culprit, the Viking mace, but not just any mace. Some versions were so brutal that they earned the name the cat's paw, featuring spiked flanges shaped like claws, designed to crush helmets and fracture skulls with terrifying efficiency. This weapon was wielded with devastating force. Picture lifting a 4 to 6 pound iron ball attached to a solid wooden handle and bringing it down with the impact equivalent of dropping a bowling ball from 5 feet onto your opponent's head. The mace didn't need to cut. It crushed, delivering blunt force trauma that rendered opponents unconscious or worse, cracked open helmets and shattered jaws. The spikes ensured that even armor couldn't save you, turning protective gear into nothing more than a painful target. And those spikes, imagine them as the Viking version of studded tires on a car, gripping, grabbing, and tearing into whatever came in contact. What's more, this mace was a symbol of status and fear, often depicted in Viking art and mythology as the weapon of choice for gods and legendary warriors. The church, however, saw its indiscriminate destruction as blasphemous, a weapon that caused ungodly carnage, far too cruel to be wielded by a Christian. To them, this wasn't a weapon of honor but of sheer horror, and thus it was condemned and banned from Christian lands. But the creativity of the Vikings didn't end there. They were not just brutal fighters but innovators, engineers turning everyday items into instruments of death. Take, for example, the spear, a weapon as old as war itself, yet the Vikings elevated it with a secret edge. Some spears had a unique twisted design on the shaft, known today as spiral alloy forging. This twisting not only reinforced the spear's strength and flexibility, but also caused it to spin when thrown, much like a rifle bullet spinning for stability. Imagine hurling a spear that could whirl through the air, drilling through flesh and bone with the precision of a modern-day bullet. The technical advantage here was staggering. While a normal spear could break or veer off course, the spiral design ensured it pierced armor and shields more effectively, boring through like a corkscrew. Modern science tells us that this spin improves accuracy and impact force, much like how a spiraled rifling in gun barrels improves bullet trajectory. Imagine firing a medieval javelin with the precision of a sniper, quite a leap for the Viking age. This innovation made Viking spears lethal, not only in close combat, but also from a distance, changing how battles played out across Europe. But again, such effectiveness came at a price. The church forbade knights and Christian warriors from using spears with twisted shafts, labeling them as devil's weapons that brought cursed precision to the battlefield. Next time you toss a frisbee or play catch, remember the Vikings were somehow doing something even cooler, throwing lethal, spinning iron darts hundreds of years before anyone else. But even with all their ruthless weapons, the Vikings faced a unique problem on the battlefield and at sea: weather. Freezing rain, bone-chilling winds, and endless snow could sap a warrior's strength faster than any enemy sword. So the Vikings crafted a weapon that doubled as survival gear: the firebrand. Think of a giant burning torch but weaponized. It was a bundle of pitch-soaked wood, wrapped tightly and lit, used both to set ships ablaze and as a close-range weapon. Picture holding a flaming club or a blazing stake, wielding it to both light your way and scorch your enemies, literally turning night into day with fire. These firebrands could send enemy ships up in flames within minutes, turning raging waters into hellish light shows. The pitch burned at temperatures over 1,000 degrees F, enough to melt tar and soften wooden ship hulls to the point of collapse. This was Viking napalm. an early version of incendiary warfare that confused enemies with light and terror. Holding one of these blazing weapons was like carrying a medieval flamethrower, though with a much bigger risk that you might just set yourself on fire too. Because of their terrifying efficiency and cruel nature, the church banned firebrands outright, warning that Christians must not wield hellfire on earth, lest they mirror the devil himself. Yet Vikings used them, fueling their raids with flames and fear. A vivid reminder that these weapons were not just tools, but symbols of Viking might, terror, and innovation. So far from the romanticized axe-wielding barbarian, the Vikings were masters of combining utility, brutality, and cunning in their weapons, each crafted to maximize terror and efficiency, pushing boundaries that even the church dared not accept. But as we peel back today's brutal curtain, we're only halfway through. Next time, we'll reveal more of these haunting weapons, from tangled nets of death to poisoned arrows, and blades dipped in dark secrets so deadly, they shaped the fate of entire kingdoms. Because understanding these weapons isn't just about violence, it's about resilience, survival, and the fierce ingenuity of a people who thrived in a world where every day could be your last. Stay tuned because the darkest, most fascinating Viking weapons are yet to come. Let's dive back into the stormy, brutal world of Viking warfare, where every weapon was designed not just to kill, but to terrorize so thoroughly that even the church couldn't stomach them. Now that we've seen chains that crushed and axes that hooked, it's time to plunge deeper into their arsenal of menace. Weapons so fierce they flickered on the edge of legend and nightmare. Take the Viking war hammer, for instance. Not your average blacksmith's tool, this weapon was shorter than a spear but packed more punch than most axes. Imagine a solid iron head, weighing up to 4 pounds, attached to a wooden shaft just 2 feet long, small enough to swing with one hand, but delivering blows with the force of a punch from a heavyweight boxer, estimated at roughly 800 pounds per square inch impact. What made it truly terrifying wasn't just the raw power, but the design. A flat hammerhead opposite a spike, perfect for smashing armor or piercing mail. It was like wielding a medieval jackhammer, turning even the toughest helmets into crushed scrap. The war hammer was deadly efficient against the chainmail and leather armor common in the 9th and 10th centuries. Unlike a sword that could glance off or get deflected, the war hammer's blunt force could cause internal damage without breaking the skin. Think of it as a medieval concussion device, designed to knock enemies unconscious without necessarily killing them outright. And that made it terrifying for the church, because it created suffering beyond death. For clergy advocating chivalry and honorable combat, inflicting prolonged, agonizing wounds was condemned, and the war hammer quickly earned its ban and renouncement. But if you think the Vikings only relied on smashing and slashing, think again. They were masters of psychological warfare too. Enter the infamous Viking bolus, a weapon that resembled a simple hunting tool but was engineered to incapacitate with chilling efficiency. Picture 3 iron balls, each weighing nearly 2 pounds, connected by strong leather cords about 4 feet in length. When swung above the head and thrown, these balls would spread out wildly, tangling around the legs of horses or opponents. The bolus was a force multiplier. It could stop a charging cavalry or a sprinting opponent dead in their tracks. Much like modern-day police use bolo cuffs or drone nets to immobilize suspects. Think of it this way. One well-aimed throw could bring down a mounted knight, unhorse him, and leave him helpless in the mud, all without needing to draw a sword. This made the bolus a weapon of not just physical damage, but tactical disruption. And just like the chain flail, the church shuddered at this unfair weapon that turned valorous horseback charges into clumsy falls, outlawing its use among Christian warriors. And while we're on the topic of immobilization, the Vikings perfected the art of entrapment with an even deadlier cousin, the Viking net. Now, this wasn't your garden variety fishing net, but a heavy iron-weighted death trap, designed to be thrown at close range. These nets were woven with iron rings or small hooks, weighing upwards of 15 pounds. Just imagine trying to run while that wrapped around your legs or arms. It was called the death snare by some historians, for good reason. Once entangled, a warrior was helpless to fight back, completely vulnerable to follow-up attacks or capture. The net was like a medieval version of handcuffs crossed with a bear trap. It required no skill with a blade or arrow, just the cruel tactic of turning a fierce fighter into a tangled prisoner. This twisted form of warfare didn't sit well with the church either, which promoted the ideal of open, honorable combat. For them, the net was a devilish tool, designed to circumvent true battle valor, earning it a swift ban. But entrapment wasn't enough for the Vikings. They also concocted poisons and toxins to tip the scales in even the longest battles. One such devastating weapon was the poison-tipped arrow. Unlike your average arrowhead, these were coated with deadly substances extracted from local plants and even venomous animals, such as wolfsbane or the saliva of venomous snakes imported from far-flung lands. Imagine that slow, creeping dread as a wound from an arrow not only pierces your flesh, but begins to shut down your body from the inside, causing unbearable pain, swelling, and eventually paralysis. In a society where quick, evident death was the norm, poisoning was terrifyingly insidious. It turned battles into lotteries of slow death and suffering. In effect, these poison arrows were the Viking version of chemical weapons, banned by the church as unholy and horrific. They were excommunicated for their use, reflecting a moral repulsion for weapons that extended cruelty beyond the battlefield and into slow, agonizing death. But even poison couldn't satisfy the Viking urge for ultimate lethality. Enter the Sikhs, a weapon that at first looks like a simple long knife, but was anything but ordinary. The Sikhs' blade varied between 12 to 24 inches, razor sharp, and often intricately engraved with runes said to carry magical or protective power. But here's the twist. Some Sikhs had reinforced back edges shaped like serrated blades or tiny spikes, capable not only of slicing but ripping armor and flesh simultaneously. Imagine the Sikhs as a combination of a sharp blade and a saw, allowing the Viking to hack through chainmail like a power tool slicing through steel mesh. In some depictions, these weapons were dipped in poison or coated with acidic plant extracts to maximize bleeding and infection. This fusion of cutting-edge metallurgy and chemical warfare made the Sikhs uniquely feared and made the church's bans even more fervent. It was the ultimate dirty weapon in their eyes, taboo and relegated to outlaw bans. But the Vikings didn't just kill for the thrill. They engineered their weapons with survival in mind. Take the curious example of the Viking shield boss, a round, iron dome fixed at the center of the wooden shield. This might seem defensive, but its design doubled as an offensive weapon. In close combat, warriors could slam their shield boss into an opponent's face or ribs with the force of a fist punch, delivering concussive damage while keeping their sword or axe ready. The boss was made from iron nearly half an inch thick, able to withstand crushing blows without bending. Picture using your own shield like a battering ram, turning defense into attack, a Viking's multi-tool war technique. This ability to fight with offhand weapons shocked the church, who preferred clear distinctions between offense and defense, seeing shield bashing as barbaric and unfair. Shield bosses, therefore, earned their share of condemnation for blending offense and defense in ways Christian knighthood considered ungentlemanly. And then there's the infamous Viking throwing axe, the Francisca. Not just any axe, the Francisca was small, designed for throwing with a unique curved shape and weighted head that spun end over end through the air. It could reach speeds of over 60 miles per hour in skilled hands, embedding itself into shields, helmets, or even throwing enemies off balance with the sudden whistling impact. Imagine standing in a tight formation, hearing the sudden scream of flying axes darkening the sky, then feeling a heavy iron blade bite into your shoulder or snap your spear shaft. The Francisca was the medieval version of a tactical grenade, briefly chaotic but deadly, disrupting tight enemy lines. The church frowned upon anything that could bring dishonorable surprise attacks in battle, further painting the Francisca as unchristian and worthy of bans and disdain. But the deadliest weapon of all, the dreaded Viking sword known as the broken edge. Now it sounds odd, a sword that's intentionally broken. But the Vikings found that damaging the edge ever so slightly created tiny microscopic chips along the blade that could tear armor fibers instead of cleanly slicing. This brutal, jagged edge could cause wounds that were harder to heal and more prone to infection, ensuring long-term suffering. Medieval blacksmiths called this technique false sharpening, and it required careful craftsmanship to produce a weapon that looked perfectly functional, but was secretly designed to mutilate. Imagine an enemy thinking they were wounded lightly, only to discover that every movement ripped flesh further, the Viking equivalent of fractal damage. The church's horror was twofold. Not only did this weapon cause prolonged pain, it also went against their teaching of fair war by weaponizing infection and suffering, hence the bans. So what can we learn from these brutal creations beyond their historical violence? Every one of these banned weapons tells a story of human ingenuity pushed to the edge, of survival in hostile, frozen lands, and psychological warfare as brutal as any physical weapon. They show us how the Vikings mastered a balance of engineering, chemistry, and raw ferocity that left rulers and priests shaking in their boots. And here's the final thought. These weapons didn't just kill enemies. They forged an identity, a legacy etched in iron and blood. The church bans were less about stopping violence and more about controlling what kind of violence was deemed acceptable. But the Vikings answered with innovation, adapting and evolving their arms to defy those constraints. So next time you feel the chill of a cold winter night, imagine the Viking, warrior gripping a weapon that's more than just a blade, but a tool of survival, terror, and resilience. Think about how every swing, every strike, carried not just the weight of iron, but the will to protect family, homeland, and honor against impossible odds. This was no mere fighting. It was the art of living fiercely in a world where only the strongest, smartest, and most ruthless survived. And even centuries later, those lessons resonate, reminding us that human creativity and the relentless desire to protect what we love can take form in the most astonishing and unexpected ways. The Vikings gave us more than just stories of conquest. They gave us a testament to survival, to ingenuity born in fire and frost, to the complex dance between honor and horror. In the end, their weapons were not just instruments of death, but symbols of a people who refused to be broken by the cold or by the church's fear. And that's why these 10 Viking weapons remain legendary, not just for their deadliness, but for what they tell us about the human spirit's thirst for power, protection, and perseverance. Thanks for sailing through this dark and fascinating saga with me. Remember, history's deadliest weapons are often less about bloodshed and more about the sharper edges of human innovation. Stay curious, stay bold, and let the Viking spirit inspire fire in your own battles, whatever they may be.